following program is rated TV MALV. It contains strong language and violence. It is intended only for mature audiences.
One guy died. I came up here to help you guys. Sit down. Sit down,
How did you break the news to your mother?
As human beings, every breath we take and every second that passes on Earth is one that we can't take back. The universal clock is always actively ticking against us. God willing, most individuals can lead comfortable, long, and healthy lives. But what happens when the human body is exposed to some of the harshest conditions that could possibly be found on this planet? An environment so inhabitable and deadly that every second you spend there, the closer you are to death. A place where every labored breath you take could be your last. The place where your body becomes its own worst enemy, not strong enough at times to match the intensity or determination that an individual's mind possesses, leaving them a battered and cold broken hull or shell of a human, and in many cases left frozen in time, frozen in place, turned to stone, a reminder of the dangers and challenges that this death zone presents. Today we'll examine the horrors of high-altitude mountaineering and some of history's most infamous events within it. You can't mention the beginning of high-altitude mountaineering and its tragedies without mentioning George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. George Herbert Mallory, born June 18, 1886, was an English mountaineer who participated in the first 3 British Mount Everest expeditions. Although only a part of a largely coordinated operation, led and funded by the British Crown, Mallory established himself as an essential figure and an overall skilled high-altitude mountaineer. After a failed attempt of conquering the mountain in 1922, a 3rd British expedition would set out again to the region and would give Mallory another chance at scaling the monster of a mountain. Till then, no one in history had achieved getting to the summit of Mount Everest, or any other 8,000-meter peak. But on June 8th, Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine, an Oxford University student and a less experienced mountaineer, left their high camp to attempt their summit push. Sandy, known for his athleticism and mechanical skills, was chosen to join George Mallory on his summit attempt due to his expertise with oxygen equipment. And using Irvine's modified oxygen apparatus, the two pushed on towards the summit. Noah Odell, climbing in support below, would later write in his diary that at 7,900 meters, just below the death zone, he saw Mallory and Irvine on the ridge nearing the base of the final pyramid, climbing what he thought at the time was the very difficult second step of Mount Everest at around 12:50 p.m. That was the last time that the two men would ever be seen alive. Whether either of them ever reached the summit remains a question still discussed and debated to this day. The remains of the two men would remain unknown for nearly a century. In 1999, the somewhat intact remains of George Mallory would be discovered by Conrad Anker on an expedition looking for the evidence of the two. The frozen, pale white remains of Mallory looked oddly preserved, considering he had perished 75 years earlier. The freezing temperatures and conditions at altitude have an odd effect of preserving the corpses that succumb in the death zone. As for his partner that day, Andrew Sandy Irvine, his whereabouts and remains would remain a mystery up until recently, when popular filmmaker and Nat Geo contributor Jimmy Chin and fellow expedition members on October 11th, 2024 would discover a boot belonging to Andrew Sandy Irvine. National Geographic expedition made the discovery on the central Rongbuk Glacier near Mount Everest. The boot, along with other remains, had a sock labeled A.C. Irvine. They were found emerging from melting glacial ice. This was the only fragment left of two great and daring men.
All due respect is shown by us, having had to disturb the body of George Mallory. I'd like to say Psalm 103. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy, slow to anger, and of great goodness. As a father is tender towards his children, so is the Lord tender to those that fear, for he knows of what we are made. He remembers.
This guy was a really talented climber. It took a great degree of skill and confidence to go with that limited amount of gear to that distance.
What Mallory did and Irvine presumably did was just phenomenal.
You could sense something of his determination. I could, and I found myself coming away from it thinking, well, maybe he did summit.
This haunting tale would set the tone for the next century on the mountain and all other 8,000 meter peaks, with story after story, inevitably with the same ending, all starting with climbers' hopes, dreams, and aspirations of glory, accomplishment, and even fame by reaching the summit, only for an individual to meet their cold, lonely end in the death zone. The death zone in mountaineering refers to the altitude above which the oxygen pressure is too low to sustain human life for extended periods without the use of supplemental oxygen. It's generally agreed that anything above around 8,000 meters is considered the death zone. It's named such for a reason. For every second you spend above 8,000 meters, every laborious breath you take, every small movement that requires full effort and energy, your body is slowly dying. Your organs are slowly failing. Your brain and your senses are ceasing to function. Essentially, your body begins to eat away at itself and presents the following conditions. Hypoxia, or the lack of oxygen in the blood. This is where climbers begin to feel weak, with their blood not being able to be properly oxygenated with the thin air at altitude. Next is high-altitude cerebral edema and high-altitude pulmonary edema, essentially swelling of the organs, with high-altitude cerebral edema, or HACE, being swelling of the brain, and with high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE, being fluid buildup in the lungs. Pulmonary and cerebral edema is one of the most common and deadly afflictions with climbers in high altitude, with it involving a multitude of symptoms from swelling and fluid buildup in the lungs to that of the brain. With the already thin air becoming even harder to breathe in, climbers begin to suffer from hacking coughs or headaches, nausea, fatigue, and as the symptoms progress, cognitive impairment begins. This involves difficulty thinking, reasoning, or being able to make decisions, oftentimes leaving climbers delirious and completely unresponsive, rendering them unable to move, essentially a death sentence inside of the death zone.
You don't know what it's like. You don't know how difficult it is to actually survive at that altitude.
It's horrendously exposed. You do encounter dead people. There are bodies up there that can't be moved or removed because of the nature of the terrain.
The minute that you die, you stop being flesh and blood and you become part of the mountain. You adhere to the frozen rock.
People die. This is the cold, hard facts of life at 8,000 metres. You're in the death zone. It's a graveyard up there.
On top of all the problems presented in high-altitude mountaineering, the main difficulty, some would say, isn't the battle of survival within yourself as your body slowly fails you, but the battle between you and the mountain. With 8,000 meter peaks being so high that they create their own powerful and unpredictable weather systems, with temperatures dropping so low at times that spending one night above 8,000 meters would most likely be your last. And with ice and snow conditions ever changing, navigating and timing these conditions is the art in of itself. And each time a mountaineer sets off in hopes of scaling one of these peaks, it's a true dance with death. That's why high-altitude mountaineering is often referred to as the fatal game. Case after case of the brutal and unforgiving consequences of any slight error or miscalculation. Some of mountaineering's most tragic and infamous moments. On paper, the terror and desperation of one's final moments in the death zone are hard to understand. Some stories more tragic than others. Tales of abandonment, tales of pain, tales of heroism. To understand high-altitude mountaineering and its dangers, one must have the lay of the land. In climbing on these extreme peaks, one is willingly entering a world in which humans do not belong. A world where the conditions are so dire that it's a struggle to just survive, let alone climb to the top of a summit. When climbing high altitude, if for any reason you become unable to move or carry on, it is common notion that it is every man for himself. Any time and energy a rescuer spends in an effort to assist someone, they would knowingly be putting his or her own life at risk, a concept of self-preservation that has led to climbers making some of the most brutal and sometimes deemed selfish decisions that they could.
The hardest thing is to think that people think that you would walk past a dying person and not help them if you could.
He was a human being. Their aim is to get to the summit, and the welfare of anybody on the way is just too bad.
Although not the only 8,000 meter peak, Everest is by far the most famous, and although not considered as difficult and as dangerous as several other 8,000 meter peaks, such as K2 and Annapurna, Everest, due to its popularity, attracts the most amount of people looking to challenge themselves and scale the mountain. Expedition crews and companies offer assisted paid trips where the climber pays a premium fee and in turn is given climbing support and guide up the mountain, with some more reputable and well-established companies charging fees close to 6 figures and other more inexperienced crews charging cheaper. I say this all to bring into context one of Everest's most infamous tales, the story of David Sharp. David Sharp, born the 15th of January 1972, was an Englishman. He was noted as being a talented rock climber who seemed to acclimatize well, and was known for having a good sense of humor and pleasant to be around. He appeared briefly in the season 1 of the Discovery Channel television show Everest Beyond the Limit, which was filmed the same season as his ill-fated expedition to Everest. Sharp was a hobby climber and was looking forward to start his career as a schoolteacher, and after 2 previous failed attempts to summit, David Sharp returned to Everest determined to reach the top on a solo climb arranged through a company called Asian Trekking. Sharp was climbing alone and had intended to reach the summit without the use of supplementary oxygen, which is considered to be extremely risky, even for a very strong acclimatized mountain climber. However, Sharp did not consider it a challenge to climb Everest with the use of supplementary oxygen. Sharp was climbing with a basic services package from the Asian Trekking Company that did not offer support after a certain altitude is reached on the mountain, or a Sherpa to climb with as a partner. This package only provided a permit, a trip into Tibet, and minimal oxygen equipment. Sharp had chosen this much cheaper and rudimentary option in an attempt to save money and conquer Everest at his own pace and under his own skill. Some would call his actions bold or brave in nature, while others would say it's foolish or naive. For on May 13th, just below the northeast ridge, Sharp decided to make a summit attempt during the late evening hours. It is believed that Sharp either managed to reach the summit or turn back just near the summit to descend very late the 14th of May. Sharp was forced to bivouac during his nighttime descent at about 8,500 meters, well inside the death zone, under a rocky overhang known as Green Boots Cave, a landmark marked by the body of an Indian climber who is believed to have died in 1996, whose remains and eerily colored green boots remain frozen in place, a reminder of the dangers of the death zone. Sharp, without any remaining supplementary oxygen, either due to bad weather conditions or possible equipment failure, was likely suffering from a degree of altitude sickness, and on top of all the issues presented, it was one of the coldest nights recorded that year on May 14th. Sharp's predicament was not immediately known, as he was not climbing with an expedition that would monitor climbers' locations, and he had not told anyone beforehand of his summit attempt. Although other climbers had spotted him on his ascent, he also did not have a radio or a satellite phone to notify others. Truly, David Sharp found himself all alone on the dark, frozen tip of the world. And as the next morning of May 15th came, this is when members of several different expeditions, ascending and descending the mountain, would encounter the half-frozen, barely alive Sharp. He had made it through the frozen night, and at about 1 a.m., Sharp was found by a Hymex expedition team that was making their summit push. Inside of the cave, with his arms clasped together around his legs, his body frozen, he was semi-conscious and unresponsive. Mark Woodward and his group, including Mark Inglis, Wayne Alexander, Mark Wetu, and some Sherpa porters, encountered an unconscious Sharp. He was affected with severe frostbite, but noticeably still breathing. Woodward noted Sharp had thin gloves and no oxygen, and that they yelled and screamed at Sharp to get up and get moving, to follow the headlamps back to the lower altitude high camps. Woodward shined his headlamp directly into Sharp's eyes, but Sharp was unresponsive, he said. Woodward, believing Sharp was in a hypothermic coma, he commented, "Oh, this poor guy, he's stuffed," and believed Sharp was past saving and could not be rescued. Woodward attempted to radio their advanced base camp about Sharp, but received no reply. Wayne Alexander commented, and I quote, "God bless, rest in peace," before the group moved on and left Sharp to die inside of the cave. Woodward said it was not an easy decision, but his chief responsibility was the safety of his team members, and stopping in the extreme cold at that time would have compromised his team's survival. At their elevation within the death zone, one has to be conscious and able to walk to be able to be considered rescuable, he said.
Near the summit of Mount Everest, there's a cave the climbers call Old Green Boots.
Green Boots is a climber that died in 1996, I think, on the way down.
On the morning of May 14, 2006, a group of mountaineers were shocked to find another climber, frozen but still alive and sitting next to Green Boots.
Coming across someone stricken, whipped away by the harshness of the environment, was horrible. It's the worst thing I've seen in my life.
Believing there was nothing they could do, they decided to leave the stricken man and carry on.
It's a hard thing to explain, but that's the hard calls that you sometimes have to make in mountaineering.
He described to me a man that was pretty much dead, and then Max comes along and says, "Oh no, he's come alive again."
More than 30 people walked past the stricken man that night, and yet a double amputee, Mark Ingalls, was the only one blamed for not helping him.
The hardest thing is to think that people think that you would walk past a dying person and not help them if you could.
He was a human being. Their aim is to get to the summit, and the welfare of anybody on the way is just too bad.
Now, we can't create barriers or walls of cotton wool where we can all go there safely and come home alive. People don't find that challenging enough.
People die. This is the cold, hard facts of life at 8,000 metres. You're in the death zone. It's a graveyard up there.
Several more climbers approached Sharp, seeing him lying in Green Boots Cave. A Turkish team descending found David around 7 a.m. Sharp had no oxygen left, with severe frostbite and some frozen limbs. 2 Turkish climbers stayed with him and gave him something to drink and tried to help him move, but were unsuccessful. They were forced to leave due to low oxygen, but intended to return with some more. Members of the Turkish team placed radio calls to others of Sharp's grave condition. Around 8:30 a.m., 2 other members of the Turkish team found him and cleaned out Sharp's iced mask to provide some oxygen, but again had to continue descending when they themselves began to run out of oxygen supply. A little after 9 a.m., a member of the Hymex expedition team, who had successfully summited and was now descending, again found Sharp and tried to help him. He also notified the Hymex expedition manager, Russell Bryce, over the group's radio. He had not seen Sharp in the dark during the ascent. Shia observed that Sharp was unconscious, shivering severely, and wearing a thin pair of wool gloves with no hat, glasses, or goggles. Sharp was severely frostbitten and had frozen hands and legs, and was found with only 1 empty oxygen bottle. Shia stayed in an attempt to aid Sharp, and at one point, Sharp stopped shivering, leading Shia to believe that he had died. Sometime later, he started shivering again. Shia attempted to give him oxygen, but there was no response. After about an hour of this, Russell Bryce advised Shia to return as there was nothing left to be done, and he was running out of oxygen himself. Again, they were forced to leave Sharp inside the cave. Soon after Shia of the HIMEX team descended, later in the morning, around 10 to 11 a.m., some of the others from the second Turkish group re-encountered Sharp during their descent and attempted to help him. Purba Tashi, the lead Sherpa guide for HIMEX and a Turkish Sherpa guide, gave Sharp oxygen from a spare oxygen bottle. They patted and massaged him in an attempt to aid his blood circulation and tried to give him something warm to drink. At one point, Sharp even mumbled a few sentences to the men. The group attempted to get Sharp to his feet, but he could not stand. Even with assistance, moving Sharp into the sunlight required the two strongest Sherpa climbers and took 20 minutes to do so. After great effort and painful deliberation, the group decided Sharp could not be rescued, and they descended, again leaving Sharp to perish alone on the side of the cold and desolate mountainside. And with this final expedition team leaving, David Sharp's fate was solidified as he would remain in Green Boots Cave. His death caused global controversy and debate regarding the ethics of high-altitude mountaineering and behavior in the death zone, because of the fact that he was passed by several climbers heading to and returning from the summit as he lay dying, with several groups, including the HIMEX team, deciding to continue and carry on with their summit push instead of aiding the dying man. Many argued that even though several others had tried to help him, Sharp was beyond saving, and that he was well aware of the danger that he had put himself in. Although not the only case of abandonment or self-preservation inside of the death zone, with more contemporary cases popping up each mountain climbing season.
Near the top of the K2, the group of climbers in this video can be seen just 1,300 feet away from the top of the world's second highest mountain. But rather than celebration, some face criticism after a porter collapsed on the route. Mohammed Hassan, a father of three, had slipped from a narrow ledge at around 8,200 meters. But a video shows part of a group climbing over him, pushing on to reach the summit.
We are very happy to be here.
Record-breaking mountaineer Kirsten Harila was among the climbers determined to set a new record, filming this video before she says she knew Hassan was dead. Harila, though, believes she and her team did everything they could.
We tried to rescue him for many hours, and it's a very, very challenging and dangerous mountain, and we were probably on the most dangerous place, and it was an accident, and we tried what we could.
But footage of the fatality captured by mountaineer Philip Flamig tells a different tale, and so does he.
It's really terrifying. They had to literally step over this body when he was lying there on this little ledge, which is like this. All these people needed to pass him. He was still alive. In the next picture I saw, okay, they are up. There was just one person rubbing him. I said, why didn't they brought him down?
Some of the climbers have now met with Hassan's family, who are coming to terms with their loss. But for those who were there with him at the end of his life, questions over whether they did all they could to save him. Shaman Freeman Powell, Sky News.
Famed climber Rienhold Messner had his own tale of tragedy, which occurred in 1970 in the death zone of Nanga Parbat, the 9th tallest mountain, in which after separating from his brother due to extreme conditions and fatigue, he was forced to abandon his own kin after they had lost track of each other. He would end up descending and surviving the ordeal, but unfortunately, his brother Gunther Messner would fall victim to the death zone like many before him.
And then, just like with addicts, the desire is there again, even though I know what a strain it is, and I'm afraid of doing it again. I have to. Just like an addict can't stop. It could be that mountain climbing is just as obsessive and morbid.
Das Süchtigsein, das Rauschgift nehmen sein kann. So krankhaft ist vielleicht auch das Bergsteigen.
Could it be, and this is a sensitive question, that this kind of mountain climbing involves a kind of death wish?
I think a death wish is often interpreted into all forms of activity that push the limits of human accomplishment. I never had the desire to kill myself while climbing. If I ever had or have similar feelings, it's in totally different situations, but never while climbing a mountain. I'm even convinced that someone who climbs up the face of a cliff to throw himself off can't actually do it when he's up there.
Ein potenzieller Selbstmörder, jemand, der sich jetzt umbringen möchte, der in eine Wand steigt, um sich runterzustürzen, der kann es nicht mehr.
Kann man sich vielleicht vorstellen, dass nachdem ihr beiden Brüder doch so nahe zusammen waren.
Do you suppose that because you two brothers were so close, your brother might have died in your place? And might that have given you a different attitude towards death?
Ein anderes Verhältnis zum
I have a different attitude towards death in general because of mountain climbing and also perhaps because of my brother's death. Even though I still have the feeling that he's still alive, and not just in dreams, but say when I look at the mountains we climbed together. We were together on the hardest climb I've ever been on, in Mittelpfeiler, on the Heiligkreuzkofel in the Dolomites. And we went through tough situations, where he, as well as I, whoever was belaying, was responsible for holding everything in case one of us fell. And that welded us together so intensely that we can never be separated again. And whenever I look at that rock face today, I can't climb it anymore without my toes. I have the feeling he's still alive, and I feel those hard, dangerous moments so intensely just as he'd feel them if he were with me. I don't have the feeling that he died in my place. I have the feeling that I myself died on that expedition. The entire descent, there were moments when I said to myself, it's all over. We can't go any further. Nothing but a sheer rock face dropping off in front of us, and we don't have a rope. What do we do now?
Nicht mehr weiter, jetzt fällt die Wand senkrecht vor uns ab, wir haben kein Seil, was sollen wir tun? Da bin ich wieder hinauf und
Then I climbed back up and by chance found another way down. But there were dozens of moments on the way down where I was sure it was all over. And down in the valley, after he had disappeared, after I had searched for him all night and the next day and waited, and he didn't show up, I didn't care if I died or not.
Gewartet hatte und nicht mehr da war, dann war mir auch völlig gleichgültig, ob ich jetzt sterben würde oder nicht sterben würde. Und ich bin dann auch
The rest of the way down, I didn't even think. I just kept on going out of force of habit.
Mehr willentlich, sondern mehr in Gewohnheit. Ich habe auch die Schmerzen.
I didn't even feel the pain. I was barefoot because my feet were so swollen they didn't even fit in my shoes. Then I blacked out, and when I woke up later, I was amazed I was still alive.
Und wieder aufgewacht und habe gestaunt, dass ich noch lebe.
And when I got back, when I got home, I had this feeling that my life began anew with that tragedy. That is, after I came to in the forest and the valley in Diamir.
How did you break the news to your mother?
Meine Mutter hat es viel besser verstanden als alle anderen Menschen.
My mother understood it better than anybody, and yet it was still so hard.
Another dark and tragic story is the tale of the sleeping beauty of Everest, Francys Arsentiev, who was one of the first American women to reach the summit of Mount Everest without the use of bottled oxygen on May 22, 1998. However, tragically, she died during her descent of that same summit bid. Her story is one of tragedy. After 2 failed summit attempts in the days earlier with her husband Sergei Arsentiev, the pair would make their final effort on May 22nd. Due to the absence of oxygen supplementation at such a high altitude, the two moved slowly and summited dangerously late in the day, but were successfully able to reach the summit. As a result of the slow pace and time, they were forced to spend yet another night above 8,000 meters. During the course of the evening, the two became separated. Sergei was able to make his way down to the high camp in the following morning, only to find that his wife had not yet arrived. Realizing that she was stuck somewhere dangerously high upon the mountain, Sergei then set back off to find her, carrying an oxygen bottle and medicine in the hopes of saving his wife. Details of what happened next are uncertain, but the most plausible accounts suggest that on the morning of May 23rd, Francys Arsentiev was encountered by an Uzbek team that was climbing the final few hundred meters to the summit. She appeared to be half conscious, affected by the oxygen deprivation and frostbite, but still alive. And as she was unable to move on her own, they attended to her with oxygen and carried her down as far as they could, until they depleted their own oxygen supplies and became too fatigued to continue the effort. When they left Francys, she was still alive. As the Uzbek climbers made their way down to camp that evening, they encountered Sergei Arsentiev on his way back up in search of his wife. This was the last time that Sergei would be seen alive. On the morning of May 24th, Briton Ian Woodall and South African Kathy O'Dowd and several more Uzbek climbers encountered Francys Arsentiev again while on their way to the summit. She was found where she had been left the evening before. Sergei Arsentiev's ice axe and rope were identified nearby, but he was nowhere to be found. Both Woodall and O'Dowd called off their own summit attempts and tried to help Francys for more than an hour as she was still semi-conscious and breathing. But because of her poor condition, the perilous location, and the freezing weather, they were forced to abandon her and descend to camp. She was said to have faintly pleaded with her climbers, saying, "Please, please don't leave me," repeating the phrase over and over again. But with no other option, the group was forced to leave her. She died as they found her, lying on her side, still clipped onto the guide rope. She was aged 40 and the mother to one son. Her corpse was nicknamed Sleeping Beauty for the peaceful and calm-like state her corpse would be preserved in. Her body would remain frozen in perfect view for 9 years before eventually being moved. And again, a perilous reminder of the death zone and the dangers within it. The mysterious disappearance of her husband, Sergei Arsentiev, was solved the following year when Jake Norton, a member of the 1999 Mallory and Irvine expedition team, would discover Sergei's body lower on the mountain face, apparently dead from a fall he had while attempting to rescue his wife the year before. The final and tragic conclusion to the tale of husband and wife. As stated earlier, the history of high-altitude mountaineering is shrouded in tales and stories of tragedy. As long as these great summits exist, there will be men and women who choose to test themselves and brave the death zone, no matter how challenging or daunting it may be. And just like George Mallory said when questioned, "Why climb Everest?" he replied, "Because it's there, and the death zone remains there as well." And guys, that's the end of the episode. I really want to thank you if you've made it all the way to the end. if you're listening to this on audio format or if you're watching this on YouTube with a video as well, I appreciate all the support I've gotten on both platforms. Again, it's Dark Taboo on all major podcast platforms and YouTube as well if you want a visual aspect. So again, I thank you guys so much if you listen to this, and if you are interested in any similar like content, please consider following or subscribing or anything of that nature. This is just a side note on the episode. I was thinking about including it, but again, if you're interested in the subject matter of high altitude mountaineering, I definitely would insist on checking out two of the most infamous events within it, which are the 2008 disaster on K2 and the 1996 Mount Everest disaster. Again, just because of time constraints, I didn't really want to put in both stories, because each one is almost an episode in themselves, I would think. But again, if you like this content, I would definitely say check out those two stories. Super compelling. And thank you guys again. Take care and have a good one.